All right, hi everybody. This is Serena from DevPost, and I am joined by Grant Shipely from Red Hat. We are really excited to talk to you guys about OpenShift Online Next Gen today and the Code Healthy with OpenShift competition that we're running. So I know that people are still taking a few minutes to get logged in and hang out with us for the next hour. So we're going to hold tight here for just a couple of minutes while people join, and then we will get started. Just one note, as people are joining us, do make sure that you keep an eye on that scroll bar on the bottom of your screen. We are recording this real time, and if you join later on, I believe you start from the beginning. So if you'd like to join us in real time, go ahead and pull that scroll bar all the way over to the right so that you are just a couple of seconds behind us. Otherwise, you're welcome to watch it as a recording as well. So again, we'll give people just a couple more minutes to get settled, and then we'll get started. All right, so we've got a couple viewers on. For anyone who's just joining us, again, I'm Serena Petruska from DevPost. I'm joined by Grant Shipely from Red Hat, and we are really excited to talk to you guys about the new OpenShift Online Next Gen competition that we are running on DevPost with the Red Hat team. I know that you guys already know quite a bit about this competition because you've registered and you're joining this webinar, but we really wanted to talk to you guys today a little bit more about, why we're running it, what the competition is all about, and really how to get started. So let me just kind of walk you through what we're going to cover during our time today. So first thing on the agenda is just kind of intro to what this is. I'm going to walk through what this competition is all about. I'm going to walk through some submission requirements, and then I'm going to hand it over to Grant to do kind of an online demo. So he's going to be walking through how to actually get signed up, and how to get going with this new OpenShift Online Next Gen instance that we're providing you guys with. So main requirement, this is pretty straightforward, and I think most people will understand it, but really the main requirement for this competition is to use OpenShift Online Next Gen. Now we have created a theme around this, so what we're asking people to do is go ahead and create a new health-related application that runs on the private OpenShift Online Next Gen environment that we've spun up for this particular competition, or you can port over an existing health-related app to the environment. As you've probably seen on the site already, there are a few different ways that you can kind of pull in a health-related app, because obviously that's quite general. So we've pulled that into a few different categories. We're going to be accepting applications for wearable or home automation apps. So basically applications that fit in with a Fitbit, or maybe sync with your Nest or something like that, related to healthcare, or providing better health services for users. We're going to be accepting applications for health-related games. So maybe you're doing both. Maybe you're syncing to a Fitbit and you are gamifying the experience with your friends or with your classmates, etc. We also don't want to exclude anyone, because we just really want to see what type of health apps you guys can put together. So we have a wildcard category for general health applications, and so That means if you don't fit into one of the previously mentioned categories, wearable, home automation, or games, but you have another health application that you think is a cool use case and you'd like to kind of prep to work on OpenShift, we have a category for that. And then finally, we know that some folks out there may have really amazing pre-existing health tech applications, and maybe it's not super fair to have the new guys competing with people who have been pretty established. So we do have a separate category for pre-existing health-related applications that have been migrated over to OpenShift so that they can compete against each other, and we can keep this as fair as possible for you guys. So moving forward, what the heck are you supposed to submit? What are we going to be asking for you guys to bring forth? There's really just a couple things. One is a video demo of your application. This should be a step-by-step visual demo. And we also really want to know, either in your demo or in the text description, or both, if you're really up for extra credit, how OpenShift is used in your application. What features did you use? How did you, use the OpenShift Next-Gen instance to make this a better application or a better use scenario for either you as the application provider or for your users. So we need that explanation either in the demo video or in the text description. We also want to see some images, screenshots of your application. That's helpful for the judges. And finally, but very important, we are going to need access to your application for testing. So once you submit the application on the DevPost site, you'll be showing the video, the text description, etc. But during the judging and evaluation process, we may need to actually log in, test your application, run it. So we want to make sure that we not only have access to that, but that you've given us some instructions as well. And there's places on the submission form itself to include that information. On future webinars, we'll talk through exactly how to submit on the DevPost platform, and we'll also be providing you guys with some demos of that, video demos of that, and instructions as we continue on in the competition. So before we get going with the Q&A, I just want to kind of remind anybody who maybe just started with this process or just logged in and joined us on this webinar, you can ask questions at any point during the webinar. So if you have questions right now that you're like, oh, burning question about OpenShift, about the technical aspects or about the competition itself, there is a chat box, or excuse me, a QA box on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type questions in right there. We're going to be answering those in the order that they were received. So that should be a pretty simple thing for you to do. If you are watching this as a recorded version, or you're a little bit behind and by the time you get to the end, we've logged off, it's okay. You can post questions to the discussion board, to the Slack channel, and we also have the Google group that is being heavily monitored, and questions are getting answered there all the time. So I would encourage you not only to ask your questions here, which we would love to have you do, but also to post your questions over there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually hand it over to Grant to kind of walk us through a little bit of a demo and explain, how to get started with the OpenShift platform, what you're going to need, and then just start piling those questions in. We're excited to answer them for you and make this a great experience for everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Serena. So this is Grant, and I'm going to start sharing my screen as well as turn on my video. So give me just a second here. And is that working? Looks good. Okay. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I am Grant Shipely. I'm a senior manager at Red Hat on OpenShift. You can reach me directly on Twitter at gshipley, and all of my code is github.com/gshipley. I've also written a few books for OpenShift. If you want a copy of those to help you with the hackathon, just let me know on Twitter and I'll send you one of those books. Okay, so just some background on why we created OpenShift before we actually get into how to use it. And everyone has kind of seen this over the last 10 years or so, unless you're super young, and then maybe over the last 5 years or so. But the world is completely changing. And everyone is moving to digital connected lifestyle for either good or bad. So here's a picture to illustrate this from 2005. This is a European country, a group of people gathered together I believe it was something to do with the Pope going to be there or something. But what's interesting about this picture, this was only 10 years ago. You can see down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a flip phone. I don't know what people used to do on flip phones. Certainly not text messaging. You hit the one button 3 times to get the letter C. It would take an hour to send a text message. Hopefully you guys remember those days. And back then, if people texted me, I used to get so angry at them. I'd be like, why are you texting me? If you want to talk to me, call me. And today, if someone calls me, I reject the call immediately. And I think to myself, if they want to talk to me, send me a text message. I don't want to talk to these people, right? Just text me. And so here, fast forwarding just 8 years to 2013, this is the same location in Europe, a similar event, right? And this is how our world has changed. Now everyone has these connected devices, and this joker in the middle even has an iPad. I guess he wants to see the full experience in larger than life. But you know, anyway, we are going through a digital disruption where everyone's connected, and it's impacting every single aspect of our lives. And in my opinion, we are living in one of the biggest shifts in human history. We've never seen this advancement in technology like we have seen over the last 15, 20 years. I equate it to the invention of the wheel, even something that fundamentally changes how we interact and connect as human beings. And because of this, a lot of disruption happens. And the average lifespan of a US company in the S&P 500, if you're not familiar with that, it's the top 500 companies that kind of gauge the economy and on the stock market. And that has decreased from 67 years to 15 years today. So companies are being churned around so much with disruption that who could be the top company today will not even be listed in the S&P 500 in 15 years. Now, OpenShift, which is part of Red Hat, is in the S&P 500. So I need you guys to use OpenShift to make sure we don't get displaced in the next 15 years. Excuse me. Okay, so at this current churn rate, 75% of the S&P 500 will be completely replaced in 11 years. That is crazy. That's how fast technology is disrupting this stuff. We have small companies that are taking over entire industries. You know, the famous ones that people talk about are Uber and how it's challenged the taxi industry, Netflix, and put Blockbuster out of business. And, you know, we see this everywhere. Airbnb is the largest real estate provider in the world. But out of all of this disruption, some clarity emerges. And what we were trying to do with OpenShift was try to enable software developers and larger enterprises that typically move very slow to be able to compete in a fast-moving environment. And a lot of people say the way to do that is through this new technology called containers. Everyone's heard about containers, hopefully, Docker-based containers, and how it's going to solve all of your problems. Well, containers are certainly great to use, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Like once you start developing with containers, the next thing that people realize they need to think about is orchestration, how to place those containers into the environment that they're working in. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, how you look at it, I get to speak with a lot of customers, and what I see them doing is creating their own orchestration systems to where they can deliver their containers to their infrastructure. And at the end of the day, like the container does get there, but it's not as efficient as what it should be. And so their data centers end up looking like a mess of containers just laying around, similar to how we went through VM sprawl, virtual machine sprawl 20 years ago. I fear that we're going to go through that with containers again. And eventually their infrastructure is going to reach a tipping point to where they have all of these containers sitting around in their infrastructure, but they're not able to manage them effectively. Excuse me. And so what we did on OpenShift is we partnered with Google on the Kubernetes project. Take a drink here. I'm fueled by Diet Coke. All right, so we partnered with Google on the Kubernetes project. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes, it is an open source orchestration project that Red Hat is the second largest contributor to the OpenShift team, to allow you to orchestrate these containers. And you know, if you're not familiar with orchestration, all it really means is take a container or an application you have deployed in a container and deliver them to separate nodes and handle load balancing and scale and things like that. If you've worked with Docker, you understand that it's very easy to use Docker on your local machine. But once you start thinking about actually running that in production in a clustered environment with software-defined networking, things become complicated very quickly. And that's what an orchestration system actually helps with. And we use Kubernetes for that. And so what Kubernetes allows us to do is create your data center in a way that's sane so you can manage it and have insights into it. But that's not all what OpenShift is. OpenShift so far is Docker-based containers and Kubernetes orchestration, that we wanted to make those two technologies very accessible to developers to hide the complexity of it. And so, you know, what we don't want developers to do is to work with containers, have them deployed out in production, but never use them again. And so they get old and crufty and stale, much like we have virtual machines today. We wanted developers to be able to create great things out of containers and actually use them throughout the production lifecycle. And that's what OpenShift actually is. OpenShift is a container application platform that abstracts all of the complexities away for the developer, but it still gives you access to work directly with Docker or Kubernetes if you want. And OpenShift is completely open source. We call it OpenShift Origin. That's where we do all of our work. And then we have two other variants, OpenShift Enterprise, which is what companies can use internally on their own network, and then OpenShift Online, which is what we're going to be using today, which is we take the source code that we write and publicly host it for people. But you know, one of the real reasons that we created OpenShift was to bring the two competing groups in IT together, and that's developers and operations. And obviously Darth Vader is the operations guy and the developer is Luke Skywalker. Hopefully there's developers on the call or watching this later and you agree with me. If not, then I'm sorry. But that's really why we created it, to create a platform that operations still has control over, but allows developers to self-service. And you can think of OpenShift as, you know, we do all of our work in those two upstream communities, both Docker and Kubernetes. We're the second largest contributor to both of those code bases. So the only person who contributes more to the Docker container image format, other than the OpenShift team and Red Hat, is Docker Inc. themselves. And the second largest contributor to Kubernetes we're the second largest contributor to Kubernetes. The only person who has more is Google themselves. And so we really work on those. So you can, if you're familiar with Linux, you can think of Kubernetes as our Linux kernel. That's where we do all of our work, and then we package things around it. And we truly do work in those upstream communities. Here's just a few of the features that the OpenShift team has provided to Kubernetes, if you're familiar with that. We're driving a lot of the enterprise style features as far as persistent storage and secrets and jobs and all of this stuff that you may not be familiar with. All right, so we're going to start getting into some of the technical details now, just so you'll understand when I start showing the demo in just a second. Some core concepts that you need to understand. The way you interact with OpenShift is through either a command line tool or the web console or an IDE. That's your primary ways to interact with the platform. And all of those methods talk via REST API and allows you to perform operations on the platform. And so this is kind of the architecture diagram of how all of this fits together. I'm not going to spend too much time on this today during this screencast or webinar or demo, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to focus on source to image, which is a feature we've added, the integrated Docker registry, and some of the config stuff. I'll talk briefly about persistent volume claims and pods and services and routes and so forth. No, I'm just kidding. We'll talk about things as they make sense. Now, if you just want to try out Kubernetes, and you've probably heard about Kubernetes, it's getting a lot of mind share right now in the technology space. OpenShift is probably the easiest way to install and play with Kubernetes. So hopefully I didn't bore you enough or too much that you fell asleep. So what I'm going to do now they start using the OpenShift Hackathon environment. So let me bring a new tab over here. Now the way you sign up for this is you sign up for the challenge on DevPost, and then you request an account. What actually happens on the back end is we add you, once you do that, via an automated process to a GitHub organization called OpenShift-Hackathon. And once you're a member of this organization, that's how you can authenticate to the platform. And so what you want to do is go to github.com/OpenShift-Hackathon, accept the invite that you're going to get via email to join the organization, and then you can go to the console.on.openshift.com and log in with your GitHub account. Okay. The first thing you want to do when you log in is create a project. So I created a project called Hack Demo. You can think of a project as an organizational structure to contain your application components. And so they do need to be named uniquely. No two people can have the same project name. So if you just name it Demo, someone may have already taken that. The reason it has to be unique is because that's how we generate your URL, and I'll explain that in a minute. So I'm going to go into the Hack Demo project, and this will drop you into a project overview screen, and I don't have anything in my project right now. So the first thing I want to do is add something to my project. Okay, so to do that, you click on Add to Project, and this opens up a screen that will allow you to select what type of application that you're going to deploy, or what type of database you want. So let's say if I wanted to deploy Mongo, I can type in Mongo, and we can see that we have a MongoDB right here. Let's do a PHP application, just for the sample here. I'm going to select, and you'll notice that this says Builder right here. And this is the source image stuff I was talking about. So let me get this started here real quick. I'm going to give my application a name called Grant PHP. And the next thing it asks for is a Git repository URL. So this is where your source code is actually located. And it doesn't have to be GitHub. It can be GitLab. It can be Bitbucket. It can be any Git repository. So I'm going to go over to my GitHub account real quick. And I'm just going to find a simple PHP application that we can use here. And here's one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this green button in GitHub. If you're familiar with GitHub, you understand this already. But this provides the URL that I can use. I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, go back over to the OpenShift and click on Create. Okay, so what's happening under the covers here is that the OpenShift platform is cloning that Git repository. It's going to do a build if it needs to. PHP is an interpreted language, so it doesn't need to do a build. But if it was Java, it would execute the Maven build or whatever you need there. It's also going to resolve any dependencies for any language. So for Node.js, for example, if you had a package.json, it would do an npm install on all of those. Once that build has finished, it matches it up with a base Docker image that supports, in this case, the PHP runtime. Once it downloads that base Docker image, it takes the artifact of the build and the base Docker image and creates a new Docker image on the fly. And so the output of this is going to be a Docker image, and I didn't have to write a single Docker file or run a Docker build. The platform takes care of that for me. So that's why I said it makes these things accessible to the developers, because I'm now using Docker even though I didn't know that I was using Docker under the cover. So the build is running. So let's take a look at this build. It says build Grant PHP 1 is running. A new deployment will be created. View log. So I can view this log, and here is the actual build that's happening. In the top right-hand corner, I see this follow button. And if I follow that, you can watch the build happen in real time. Now this build has finished. If we look all the way down to the bottom, you can see that it's pushing Grant PHP : latest image. So if you're not familiar with Docker, That means that it built a Docker image called Grant PHP. It tagged it with latest, and it's pushing that image to the Docker repository that is part of the OpenShift platform. So it's not pushing it to Docker Hub, it's pushing it to our internal registry for the hackathon environment. And so the first time you do this, it does take a couple minutes, just because that image can be fairly large. It's probably 600-700 megs, I would guess, and that depends greatly on the base image that you select to use, as well as how big your source code is. And so once that has pushed, it's going to be available for us to deploy. And so I hope that makes sense. The first part, or the first task, is to create the Docker image that contains your application code and store that in the integrated registry. Once it is in that registry, then you're allowed to deploy that image as a running container. So there's a difference between the image and the container. The image, you can have 1 to 1,000 containers running the same image. Okay, we can see now at the bottom that it successfully pushed our image. So if I go back to the overview page, the platform, now that the image has been added to the registry, is automatically going to deploy that for us. And so what that means is that it's taking that image and it's creating a running container out of it, similar to like a Docker run command, if you're familiar with Docker. And so now the web console is updated to indicate, sure enough, I have one application running. Okay. One of the other things we do is we provide a URL, what's called a route, to access your application as soon as it's deployed. And this is publicly available on the internet, so anyone can hit it at this point. I don't know what this is going to say because I didn't look at the source code, so we'll see. Let me click it right here. It says, this is the best application in the world. Welcome to Dev Nation. So Dev Nation was a conference I went to a month ago. And so this was an app that I used there, I guess. But let me make that bigger so you can bask in all the glory of my awesome PHP leak coding skills. This does say this is the best application in the world. I'm sure we all agree on that. All right, so let me show you a few cool things you can do. First thing is you have to understand a Kubernetes concept called a pod. A pod encapsulates a container. So the easiest way to think of it as a pod as being the running Docker container, okay? So this pod is my container that's running the image that the platform just built for me. And so if I go into this pod or container, I can do a lot of different things here. I can look at the details. Let me make this a bit bigger for you. We can see that my pod or my container is running. Here is the IP address. Here's the actual node that it's on, if you ever wanted to know that. The state is it's running since 11:28, which is just a couple seconds ago. It's ready. It has never been restarted. Here's the image that it used. So the Docker image, we called it hack demo grant PHP. Here's the hash for it. And it was only 175 megs. So I thought it would be larger. The source that it used and the GitHub hash for the source. I don't want to get too in the weeds on that. The mount that it's using for disk space and some other stuff that is probably you're not going to need to use for the hackathon. If you click on environment, this is where you can specify environment variables, and that's we'll get into that in a little bit. Yeah, we'll have time. Logs, if I ever wanted to look at the running logs for the container, I can just click on the logs button, and we see some GET requests here. Somebody on IE8, so someone, I don't know where that's coming from, maybe someone on the call hit it. But I see my GET requests here. Wait, maybe that's me. I'm on Windows today. Yeah, that must be me. I'm using Chrome. But anyway, you can see like the Apache GET requests here. The other thing you can do is click on the terminal, and this opens up a bash prompt on the actual container itself. So you can think of it as a SSH session into the running Docker container. So if you wanted to like look at the index.php file, you can do that. You know, whatever you need to do in the container. Then you can look at the events as well. And so you can kind of, you know, see that we scheduled this deployment. It pulled the image. It tried to pull the image. Then it successfully pulled the image. It created the container, and then it started the container. And so this is how you can try to troubleshoot things via the logs, terminal, and events if you have problems. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the overview and show you one of the cool things about OpenShift is we have one container running. And so when I said we want to make a production level environment accessible to developers, one of the most complex things to do as a developer is actually create a clustered environment, even for development. To do that in OpenShift, let's say I wanted to add a load balancer and separate traffic between, you know, 3 or 4 different containers all serving the same code. The way I do that is just click this up arrow, and that will create 2 containers. Under the cover, it actually is now load balancing between these 2 pods. If I want to go to 3 or 4, I can do that as well. And so that'll take about, it normally takes about 5 seconds. But of course, you know, anytime you do a live demo, it takes a little bit longer. So right now we're at 2 pods. We're up to 4. And so we have a full clustered environment load balanced right now. And so if I click on this link again, this is actually now hitting one of those containers in either a round robin or a session affinity type of environment. Okay. So let's scale this back down to 1, and you know, maybe I don't need that many containers right now. So now we're back to 1 container running. It's still load balanced, but it's just going to that 1 container. But the load balancer is still there. You can also scale it down to 0 pods if you want to. And so the reason you'd want to do that is, you know, maybe you're making a change and you don't want to, you just want to bring the entire system down by you do something under the covers. You can scale it back down to 1 or scale it down to 0. And then when you get done making your changes, you can scale it up to 1, and that'll redeploy that Docker image again inside of a running container. Okay. And so, you know, that was pretty phenomenal how quickly I was able to scale up to a clustered environment with 4 containers, scale it all the way back down to 0 so no traffic was being served, and then scale it back up. All right. So how do we actually change this code? Like once I have this deployed and I want to make a change to my application, how do we do that? So one way you can do it is with the build. So if I click on browse and then builds, we have a build called Grant PHP, and we built it one time, and it took 2 minutes and 58 seconds, and we did it 9 minutes ago. Here's the source code. Okay, so if I click on the build name Grant PHP and go to configuration, we have what's called webhooks. So we have one for GitHub. You can use the generic one for GitLab or whatever you want to use there. If I show this URL, this is an endpoint that I can connect to my project on GitHub. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, go over to my GitHub account. This is the source code, and I am going to click on the settings button in GitHub, and then I'm going to click on webhooks and services, and I have one there, so let me delete it. Okay, so this is what you would see when you'd come in, no webhooks. So you click on add webhook, you paste that URL in, and you, let's disable SSL verification, click on add webhook. So now anytime I make a change to this source code, it is going to kick off a build in OpenShift. So let me clone this locally to my machine. Let me turn off sharing real quick and then turn it back on so I can share my full screen. so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, can you see my screen and my terminal? Hopefully you can. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to make a directory called Hackathon, and I am going to git clone my project from GitHub. Okay, so I have my project here locally. It's called Simple PHP, and let's vi this index.php file. And then we're going to say, since we're not at Dev Nation, we're going to say Hackathon demo call. Okay, I made the code change. I'm going to commit my change, and we'll just call it test. And then unable to auto. You can tell I've never used Git on this new machine, so let me configure that real quick. Oh, did I do it wrong? Global. Okay, so let's try it now. Okay, so I committed my change, and now I'm going to push my change up to my GitHub repository. And it's going to ask me to authenticate. So let me do that real quick. Okay, so my change is going up to GitHub, and if I go over to OpenShift and click on the overview, you can see that I just committed that change, and a build already started. So it recognized that I changed my code, and OpenShift is going through the whole source to image process again. It's building a new base Docker image for my application. It cloned my new source code. It starts the build process, and then as soon as that new image is completed, it's going to push that new source code and new image that was created to the registry, and then deploy it. So the first time that you do this, it does take a few minutes. I believe it took just over 2 minutes last time. And each subsequent build normally happens pretty quickly. Okay, so it created that new image, and then it's deploying it again. So it takes about 40 seconds, and I'll get into how you can even speed that up faster in just a minute. So it's deploying this new change out, and so it's doing a graceful rolling deployment. Notice that it had both of them running, so it bleeds the traffic off, and then it instantiates or runs the new container, and then it switches the load over to that. And so there wasn't any downtime for the users as I was pushing a new code change out. It did it in a rolling fashion. So now if I click this URL here, we can see that my source code was changed on my production environment. It says, welcome to the Hackathon demo call. Okay. So let's look how to speed that up even more. If we go back to our console and we go to browse builds, we can see that that took 42 seconds. 42 is not too bad, but I really want it to happen faster, right? If I'm going to be using this for development. And so to do that, we can use the rsync command. So let's walk through what that would look like. So if I look at my index.php file and we say, welcome to the Hackathon demo call, and I'll just say with rsync, and then we can rsync this over to our running environment. To do that, you're going to need to use the command line tools that we haven't talked about yet. So far, we've been using the web console, and you can absolutely do everything you want to do via the web console. But if you want to take advantage of rsync for even faster gratification on your changes, you will need to use the command line tool. So how do you get the command line tools? Inside of the Hackathon environment, if you click on this question mark in the top right-hand corner and click on command line tools, it has a link to download them for your environment. We support Linux, Mac, and Windows. And so I believe I have the command line tools installed. I don't. So this will be good. I can walk through and download the correct one. So I'm going to copy this link, and I am going to go up a directory, and I'm just going to download the command line tool here. So this, I'm on the Linux system, and so, excuse me, you may be wondering, he's not actually on Linux, he's on Windows. I'm actually using the Bash for Windows environment that Microsoft released yesterday, so update if you want to use it. So I'm going to extract this archive, and this creates that OC command, okay? So now I'm going to just add it to my path. Let me get what my path is here, okay? When I export path equals $path : / hackathon. So now I should have the OC command line tool. All right, so just follow the instructions for that is on the page there. It's pretty easy to get started with the command line tool. You basically just download it, add it to your path. So I'm going to go back into my project here. And the first thing I want to do is log into the environment. And on this page, we also give you the command to do that. So you'll basically just copy the command and paste it into your console. And now I am authenticated to OpenShift, and I'm using this hack demo project. Okay, so a few things we can do is say OC get pods, and that'll list all the pods I have running, including the build pods that built our images. And then this one is the actual container that we have running. So the reason I need that is because with the OC rsync command, if you type that in, let me make this terminal a little bit bigger for you. The syntax is OC rsync, what you want to rsync, and the pod, okay? So I changed this index.php file to say welcome to the hackathon demo call with rsync. So to rsync this change over, I would say OC rsync dot for the current directory, or you could do individual files, but I would just use the current directory. And then the syntax was the pod name, and so that was Grant PHP. Let me get it again. So OC rsync dot Grant PHP 2-5 QB06, and then a colon, and then the directory you want it to go to. I think it's opt app source. Let's find the directory. So how do you find the directory you want this to go to? Click on OpenShift Online, click on Hack Demo, and you go into that terminal that I showed you how to do earlier. And you just type in pwd for print working directory, and it's opt app-root source. So good thing I checked was app root source, and hit enter. And that will, so I typed the pod name in wrong. And I typed it in wrong again. All right, so once I ran that rsync, it did everything in that directory, which is fine. That's what I wanted. So now if I come back over here and click on this, we can say, welcome to the hackathon demo call. So now my development process gets a lot faster. I can just make a change, run rsync, and refresh my browser. And that's how you can quickly iterate over development. Maybe we want this to display over and over and over. Just run rsync again and refresh your page. And that's how you can instantly change what's in your container. It's pretty awesome stuff. Now to take it one step further, if you use an IDE, let me see if I have one installed here. Surely I have Eclipse installed. I've never not had Eclipse installed. So let me pull open Eclipse here, and I'll show you how to set this up in an IDE if you want to have this happen every time you save a file inside of your IDE, assuming Eclipse starts. There we go. Click OK. So here's an application or a project I have called Insult App. And I know this font's really small, so sorry about that. But the way you would add rsync to Eclipse is just right-click on your project, go to Properties, and then go to the builders, I think, and you would add a new builder, and you would want to run a program. So click OK on that. And then your location would be the location of your OC command line tool. Your working directory will be your workspace. So you just click on your workspace there. And then your arguments is rsync, and then the same thing we passed on the command line. And then every time I make a change in my IDE and click on save, it'll automatically rsync under the covers. And so that takes it even a step further, but that's how you can instantly change things. All right, so let's go back to the environment, and let me see if there's anything else I need to quickly talk about. Adding a database. Most applications need a database of some type. So here's my project, Hack Demo. I have this PHP application. I want to add a database to it, and let's see which ones we have in this environment. We have Mongo, MySQL, and Postgres. I'm going to use MySQL, and once I click on that to add a MySQL database, and this is just going to run MySQL in a container, you can set your MySQL user, and so I'm just going to call this Hackathon MySQL password. If I don't provide anything here, it's going to auto-generate for me, and then I can create a database called Hackathon, and I'm going to click on Create. And so this MySQL database is going to be spun up just like our application was, and it's going to be in our project. And once that is created, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm coughing a lot today. There's one last step to be able to connect the two, and that is setting the environment variables, okay? So the way you set environment variables in OpenShift, and by environment variables, I mean we created a MySQL database, and so we need to know how to connect to that database from our other container. And so we do that via environment variables. So to do that, you can do it in the web console by coming in the Browse button and Deployments. And this deployment tells me what the truth of my application should look like. And to demonstrate this, let me show you what I mean. Right now, I have my deployment saying that I need one replica. Well, let's say I always want to run this with 2 replicas, click OK. Since I made that change, the platform knows that what I have defined as truth in my deployment config doesn't actually match my running production, so it self-corrected itself. It moved it up to 2 because I said I need to always run as 2. To take that even a step further, if you look at my console over here, and let me move it over to the right, if I do OC get pods, you see I have 2 of these Grant PHP pods running now. Let's say I kill one, so I say OC delete pod, and I want to delete this one. What you'll notice when I hit enter here is it'll say that this will go down to 1 because I only had 1 running, and the platform instantly knew that something happened, like maybe a whole rack went out at the data center or whatever the case may be, and it self-recovered by adding the additional pod back, right? And so that's what the deployment config is. It matches truth. So that we use in order to tell us how to connect to the MySQL database. So how this works is I'm going to go into the MySQL pod, and I'm going to go to the terminal. And if I run an env grep MySQL, it'll tell me all the environments, all the environment variables that I need to know about. Okay, so the database, password, and username. So let me go back to the overview. I want to add that information to my deployment for my application. So if I go onto deployments and go to Grant PHP and click on environment, I can add specific environment variables here. Okay, so let's see what's in there already. If I go to Browse, Pods, Grant PHP, look at a terminal and do env grep mysql. I don't have any, so I need to add those. Okay, so the easiest way to do this, or what I think is the easiest way, is to go back to my MySQL pod, go to the terminal, do an env grep mysql. Okay, and then I just open my terminal over here, and I want to add an environment variable. So I do oc get deployment config, and this will give me the same thing I was looking at in the web browser, Grant PHP, and I want to modify that. I want to set an environment variable. So the command to do that is ocenv on the deployment config called Grant PHP, and I want to add an environment variable called mysql underscore user equals hackathon, and just hit enter there. And so it is changing that as I just did it, right? Because the deployment, like I said, is the truth of my application state, and it knows that what's currently running doesn't have those environment variables set, so it's going to recreate my environment and add those environment variables. And so if I go into this pod, I can now see when I click on environment that it has it. And so that's how I would add these environment variables to be able to talk to my database. And then in my application source code, I would just connect to the database like I would any other database, as if I wasn't running on the platform. So let me show you one other thing you can do here. If I go back to my pods and go to my MySQL database and I go to terminal, I can actually just type MySQL here in the terminal, and I can connect to my MySQL database right inside the browser. I want to authenticate as the Hackathon user. Hackathon with the password of Hackathon. Yeah, well, whatever I set it to. You can connect to the database on your terminal to debug things as well, or you can connect to it from your local machine as well. But that's how you talk to the database. Let's see. The deployments, at any point in time, you can come in and create a new deployment if you want to redeploy everything. You can kick off a new build right inside of the web console by clicking on the Start Build. The settings is where you would look at your quota. Everyone in the hackathon has the same quota. So you can't create like 1,000 containers, right? Because it's a shared environment with everyone. So you do have quotas, so you can come in here and check where you're at on your quota to let you know how much you can actually scale up. Another thing that everyone has access to is persistent volume claims. Okay, so if I go into browse and storage, I have a persistent volume claim bound to MySQL. I can also attach them to my running pods. This is important because if you've used Docker before, you know that if my MySQL database went down, it's ephemeral. It doesn't save state. So OpenShift actually supports the ability to mount persistent storage into each container. So that way when you scale up or destroy a container, run a new build, your data will still be there, which is very important. All right, so I am going to stop sharing at this point. We're almost out of time. I talked way too long. And I will just see if there's any questions. I see one right now. Why do I need the robustness of containers for a consumer-facing health app, since I think containers were mainly designed for enterprise-scale app? So that is a good question. Like, in my previous slides, containers are not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination. It provides you a lot of abilities that anyone could take advantage of, especially, you saw how quick I was able to start developing with PHP. Let's say I was a Java developer and I wanted to try Node.js out. Instead of having to figure out how to install Node.js and MongoDB or MySQL on my local development environment, I was able to get that full stack stood up in a couple of minutes without having to actually modify anything on my system. And so that's really the beauty of containers, is that it allows you to run things isolated. So you can just run the components of the environment that you need, and then be able to replicate it as well. So if I did all of this on my local machine, I installed MySQL and PHP for development, and then I wanted to actually run this even for like a small mobile back end, I would have to stand up that same environment to start servicing those requests. With a container and the image, I can just ship that image around and it'll be exactly the same thing. So hopefully that answered your question. If not, ask it a different way.
Grant, that was amazing. I feel like I learned a ton. I hope that everybody watching did too. I know that we're kind of up against time and that people might have additional questions that we're not going to get to, which is to remind everybody that if you do have questions, we've got a couple more minutes. You can post them into the QA box. Otherwise, we've got a couple that came in via email that we can walk through. If you have questions after the fact, after this webinar ends in just a couple minutes, go ahead and send them to us via Slack, or you can post them into the OpenShift Online Google group. I'll post that URL in the chat box here and then also on the Slack channel. Or you can also, post questions on the discussion forum that's on DevPost. So lots of different ways to get your questions answered. But this was awesome. This was really great. Okay, it looks like we did have one more come in.
Is there a way of an installation made with the Ansible playbook to the new alpha release of 1.3, or some other way of spinning up a cluster with the alpha? Yeah, there is. If you go to, let me share my screen real quick here. So I actually create, if you go to openshift.org/VM, this is probably the easiest way to use the new alpha code, is just download and run OpenShift inside of Vagrant. As far as upgrading it with the Ansible playbook, I'm not sure. I would have to check on that. I can ask the guy who writes the Ansible installer to find out. It should just use RPM packages, but if you installed from source and compiled it, it may get a little more complicated. I'll have to check on that. The easiest way, though, is just to use this VM. So not have your own origin installation that you compiled from scratch, or what your specific environment looks like.
Right on. All right, thanks, Grant. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. So assuming that nothing else is the next 30 seconds, we're probably gonna call it a wrap for this one. But like I said, lots of different ways to get in touch with us. Both Grant and many of his colleagues are on standby, kind of ready to answer your questions. So thank you guys, everyone, for joining us. I hope that everyone who's viewing this as a recording finds it as helpful as I did. I think it was great. So we're looking forward to talking to you guys all again soon. And as questions, continue to come up, we can hold additional, webinars to go through those things. So keep us informed on what's troubling you and what's working well, so we can help create those resources. All right, cool. Thanks, Grant.
All right, thanks. It was fun.